This track is one of the best, just perfectly suited to a game that I've heard. So good. So that is Max Payne 3. For those who haven't seen me play a game through to the end, I'm a big believer in credit where credit's due, so I always let the credits roll at the end of a game on stream. And I basically use the time to kind of give a reflection on the game. Not so much a review, but just, to go back through like how I'm feeling about it right after playing through it. And I realize that you have not watched some of the films that I have. Like, there's this crossover of the stuff we've watched that I remember and that I don't, and I'm like, yeah, I've seen that tons of times in movies. So Max Payne 3. I think, especially, it's a different tone than the first two. A big piece of that is because this was made by Rockstar as opposed to Remedy. It's also why the visual look is so different and how it flows. And to me, it's always been one of those things of Max Payne 1 and 2 compared to Max Payne 3 are different sides of the same coin, is the way I've always looked at it. I love what they do with 3. And I think a big strength on it is the fact that the narrative is very much Max coming to understand what role he's playing and just not caring, right? Like, this is who he is, this is what he's become, kind of. It's almost, in a way, it's like a dark coming-of-age story of, like, Max coming to terms with the fact that, like, this is what he has become. And just trying to tear it all down because of the way he was pulled into it. It's the type of narrative that, like, you'll see a lot of times in games and in movies, and it's that whole, like, revenge versus justice theme. And with Max Payne 3, it's like, it's neither. It's just simply, this is who he is. And I think especially after the events of 1 and 2 and the things that he goes through with losing his wife and child, with what happens with Mona and all the betrayals involved in that situation, like, I think what some people probably were looking for in 3 was a continuation of that, whereas I think 3 is really more of like the ending note on like him passing through all of it, what he becomes, what he does. And that's why that like fade into the sunset I love so much, and whenever like Max Payne 3 comes on, it's like, oh my god, I love it so much. Naturally you want a Max Payne 4, and it's like, I don't know that I would. I mean, there's a little bit of I Saw the Devil in that sense, but it's not quite the same. Like, I Saw the Devil's a cat and mouse kind of scenario, so I wouldn't compare it the same to this in that sense. But like Max Payne 4, I don't really want a Max Payne 4 if it's a continuation of the story, right? If it was something revisiting somewhere between the first and third, I could see that. Maybe even like a prequel kind of situation when he's like, a really, really young beat cop. But that would be hard to pull off. And honestly, I don't know that it's necessary, right? Maybe you could have a kind of scenario where it makes sense for the character to come back post these events. But I look at it as the whole like Rambo and then Rambo Last Blood. You're overstaying your welcome at that point. Which is why the remakes of 1 and 2 interest me so much, because I think taking some of the lessons from this, even though Remedy didn't work on this game, but like, how do you make Max Payne a modern gaming franchise? I could see them doing some really cool things with the remake or remaster of 1 and 2, and bringing it into the modern era in terms of controls and the feel and look. The gunplay is still fantastic. It's also hits in a way that like Red Dead and GTA, as great as they are, don't. There's an intimacy to the way the controls feel and how you actually go through these levels. It's part of the argument for like linear design can lead to some amazing things that open world design can't, right? or at least can't hit as often. Because there's definitely some memorable firefights in both the GTAs that have come since Max Payne 3 and in Red Dead Redemption 2. But the way this is crafted for every scenario, it's hard to replicate that in an open world game as consistently. I actually found myself like way more accustomed to the way they limit bullet time in this time around. I'd be interested to come back and play this on hard at some point, and the higher difficulties as I go, just to see how that continues to feel. Because there are definitely some sections where I got super sloppy, and it's like, okay, they don't punish you quite as much with that painkiller saving mechanic. But yeah, I think it's just there's a feel and an attitude to this Max Payne that's really unique, and I think a lot of games, when people talk about like the like bravado games or over the top kind of like broy games, there isn't restraint. I think that's why you see that feel, that dynamic. And Max Payne is like this mixture of restraint and violence that is hard to pin down, I think, for a lot of other properties, a lot of other franchises. The soundtrack that Health do is fantastic. That track there, Tears, it's in the airport in the credits, is just, oh, it's so good. I've listened to that so many times outside of the game. That yeah, it's we don't see a lot of games like this, right? I want to play Control because my understanding is there's a bit of that feel. Quantum Break apparently as well, just not in this vein. So for me, Max Payne 3, it's the same way I talk about Dead Space 3, where people are like, oh man, it'd be great if they brought Dead Space back. I'm like, yeah, but where are they going with it if they go after the events? Because Dead Space 3, the final DLC that came out for it, feels like Max Payne 3 to me. It feels like if you're going to stop a franchise in terms of the main narrative, it's a perfect way to end it. And that's the feeling I have with 3. I mean, Max walking off, in the sunshine, in shorts and sandal, like, it's that he's passed through the fire of everything that's happened in his life, and now he can actually walk off into the sunset. And it feels like a perfect end cap in a way to a trilogy that's not really like a trilogy, traditionally speaking, in terms of how it's designed, because each of these games is self-contained. But I certainly would love for the gameplay systems of Max Payne to make a reappearance. So I don't know. We'd have to see how that goes about. But yeah, it's still one of the best action games out there. It feels so much like playing through a movie without taking a ton of like control and interaction away from the player. It's just a special game to me. I think for all the talk of the Red Deads and the Grand Theft Autos, in a way for me, Max Payne 3 actually points to how good I think Rockstar are as a studio, and like the heights they can hit, because you're not going to find a lot of teams that can balance something like this the way that they do, and approach it the way that they do, because it hits differently than a lot of its peers in this space, and that's Rockstar. That's the Rockstar touch, so to speak. People talk about like the BioWare touch or the Bethesda touch, like just Blizzard, like different studios where you can see their lineage in the games as they come out. Max Payne is like, what if you had them focus in on a linear game again? And the last time I remember seeing that from them was Red Dead Revolver, which is one of my favorite Rockstar games of all time. And I actually do wish they'd make a kind of like focused linear cowboy spin-off of where Red Dead's gone. Like, in my mind, what you could do is Redemption is the open world grand part of the franchise, right? And then you can have these one-offs. Make a Red Dead Revolver 2, where it's a little bit more linear. It's a little bit more of a Max Payne in the West, so to speak. But given all that they do and the number of people that they have working there and how monumentally large their projects are, I can understand why they don't. Table tennis was something that was really more of a tech demo than anything else, as they were figuring out their engine. That's why that came out. We're kind of far removed from, their Bully and Max Payne 3 days at this point. So it'd be interesting to see if it ever made a return like that. I wonder if Remedy maybe would be able to like come back to this and you kind of do have some space to set a story between 2 and 3. That's probably the best place you could pull it off, pull it back into New York. Or go with a sequel. I mean, you never say never, right? Like, they could pull something off that's fantastic and doesn't, negate the ending of 3. I just think that's very hard to pull off. I'm not sure how you do that and do it well. Yeah, this is the... I want to say it's 4th. It might be 3rd. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure this is the 4th time I've played through this game. And the build up to the airport, especially that section, is still there. I couldn't just go straight to it on PC. For context, every time I've played this before was on console when I was a console-only gamer. So on PC, I hadn't gone through once. I don't have the level select. But yeah, it's the airport part I've played more than 4 times. I've played that at least a dozen times. There's times where I'm just like, you know what? I'm in the mood. Let's go to the chapter select. Let's pick that chapter. I'm just going to fight my way through that. Because it's such a simple design. When you look at the play space, it's a 3-lane design, like you see in a lot of multiplayer maps. Of the cover on the far left, the cover in the middle, and then the cover if you go up those escalators to the right. But just that mix of how they throw the enemies at you and the track and the feel is just so good. I'd still put that up there with some of the best action sequences I've played through in a game. Because I think a lot of other action sequences people think of, there's a little bit more scripting. Like the Uncharted games have some really epic sequences, but there's just a little bit more scripting and like interactions as you're switching between things with like the train cars or this situation. What I love about the airport scene is how straightforward it is. It's just, you get thrown in, the track hits, they're coming at you, you're going at them, and it's just, it's simple. It's elegant because of how simple it is and how straightforward it is. And just that track, I really have a hard time thinking of another track that has that kind of significance. Like, people who have played through this and love this game, that track in the airport scene it's Max Payne 3. Like, that's the Max Payne 3 moment, right? And I can't think of other games that have that much tied in to one scene in that way because of the way that it's all set up between the audio. I mean, it's a high mark. It's a really high mark. If there was an award for, like, best moment of the year in games, I mean, there's some legendary ones out there with BioShock and things like that are more of the narrative moment. This is just the straight up action moment. And I love it. It's so good. I never got around to playing too much of the multiplayer. I did play it back in the day. I didn't find it as appealing as some other things. I think some of the wonkiness in the controls, especially on controller for Max Payne, come through in the multiplayer a lot more than do in the single player. I think it was part of that era of games like BioShock 2 where a lot of people looked at it and was like, wait, why is multiplayer in this? And I mean, I get it. You're trying to extend the longevity of a game, give people more ways to interact with it. And it was never a game that was really going to be open to, like, story DLC. I know it's become a bit of a joke now about the fact that, like, there was an expectation that GTA 5 might get single-player DLC, and it never did. I don't know how... You couldn't really do it with Max Payne, right? With this ending, unless it was like, oh, here's a chapter of, another job that they did together, Max and Passos, and maybe they could have gone away with that, but it's hard to argue when you nail the base narrative this well. that they needed to do any kind of tinkering with it or do anything additional to it. I have yet to play something that hits this note. And maybe, again, it's because I haven't hit some of the other Remedy games. Because Remedy, like, that's the thing. As much as this is a Rockstar game and how they went about approaching Max Payne, the lineage is a Remedy lineage. And that's why I say it feels like the other side of the same coin to me as the first two. Because Alan Wake is something that, you know, it doesn't quite use the same, you know, you're not doing the diving with bullet time and things like that, but it's another thing like that where it's got such a unique feel. Remedy's always been really good at doing that, and this was a continuation of that, and I think they nailed it. Because when I went to play GTA and Red Dead, that combat, it's the same, you know, type of shooting and aiming and cover system, and yet there's something special with how it actually comes together in Max Payne, and that feel. Yeah, this is up there for me in terms of games that I absolutely love. I want to revisit, you know, constantly. And I get the feeling I probably will on stream again. Not anytime like super soon, because there are so many other things to play. And like I said, I do kind of want to see like Quantum Break, Control, do some of those other games that play in that third-person kind of bullet-timey shooting. I know there's a bit more going on with like Control and supernatural abilities. Quantum Break 2, actually, come to think of it. But they play in a very similar space to each other. And it's not a space that I think you're getting a lot of games like this anymore. Because, you know, Gears and games like that, that's a bit different in how cover-based it is. I'm trying to think, since Control, what else has hit like this? And I can't think of anything, honestly. And yeah, to speak to the level of violence, I forget the name of it, but the physics part of the engine that they use for this is why you'll see, like, as you're shooting people, you know, you're seeing like ragdoll effects kick in even before they die. So you hit them in the shoulder and they kind of like get launched backwards from the impact. The same happens to you if you bump into anything while diving. That whole physics part of the engine has never been on display in the GTA and Red Dead games the way it was here. And again, a lot of that comes down to design. If you're building these small play spaces, there's more opportunities for you to hit those shots at close range, for people to knock into things. It did lead to a few funny incidents, like the guy that was kind of like surfing on the rail when we shot him before he got up. But I'm actually surprised there isn't more of that with how free that physics system is. So that's one piece of it that I'd be curious. Like, oh man, what if, you know, they made something like a Max Payne 4 or even a Max Payne 4 directly with the way they've developed that system since. What would it be like, right? Like, how would that look? Because there's not a lot of games that have hit that mark in terms of the selling of impact physically on like ragdolls. Instead, we get stuff that's super ridiculous, which is still fun and hilarious. The Cycle is something I've played recently where there's some really interesting situations where they'll bounce off of things as they ragdoll, and it's like, oh shit, that's not at all physically how that's supposed to work, but it looks funny as hell. Like, so it's man, I'm trying to imagine what another entry in this franchise would look like, and it would be interesting to say the least how they would approach it. I've actually wondered what if there was more of a spin-off thing. Like, this was in our discussion that I was gonna say argument, but really we pretty much agreed on it around Splinter Cell with Sam Fisher's character. Was similar to Max Payne 3. Splinter Cell with Conviction had a perfect moment narratively to basically say, okay, we're pulling Sam out of these games from then on, right? They didn't with Blacklist. That and changing the VA because of how they were capturing it all is why I never played it. But the argument we always had was like, have Sam kind of be the person then who's giving you stuff and put a new character into that. It's a little easier to pull off in a franchise that doesn't bear the name of the main character. Like, how would you make a Max Payne game where you don't play as Max Payne kind of thing? So that's something I've always wondered. Like, what if they start up a franchise, and then you wind up having Max make an appearance into it, and you're like, wait a minute, hold on, is this secretly like a Max Payne game? Like, but there's no way they'd be able to really do that just because of the fact that like you're losing the name cachet at that point. That's going to be a big part. Even with a reputation like Rockstar has, right? You launch a new franchise that's effectively Max Payne gameplay-wise, but doesn't have the name. That's, that's going to affect sales, flat out. Now, could you do something where, you give it a new franchise title, and then, like, the subtitle underneath it is something, involving Max's name, just so it's plugged in there? Yeah, you probably could. But I think most people kind of see through that at this point. I don't know that kind of attaching the name. People have become a lot more attuned to that and a lot more aggressive about it. So I don't know. I'm torn, right? It's the one hand of like, but you nail the ending with this, and on the other hand, it's like, but I'd love to see what you could do with it moving forward, with where we've gone now tech-wise, and especially where they've gone in their own engine. I mean, the visuals on this, Judge mentioned this earlier in the playthrough. It doesn't quite look its age yet, right? There's a few things texture-wise that, like, even I played this in 4K. Even in 4K, you can kind of see how there's a little bit of dating to it. But overall, I mean, there are a lot of games that don't hit this now, right? And this game is, I'm trying to remember how old it is now. Max Payne 3 came out 10 years ago. Jesus. I didn't realize it was that old. I thought it was like 2014, 2015, but this came out in 2012. Wow. Yeah, that was the 360 generation, so the timeline makes sense. Wow, I didn't realize it had been that long, actually. So this is a decade-old game now. And I think the visuals still hold up pretty damn well, honestly. So, right now it's going through a list of songs, and that is one thing that might pop up with the VOD for this, come to think of it. We'll have to see. Rockstar does love their licensed music, and I'd been asking the question as we were going through some spaces, like, are these actual, like, songs, like Brazilian songs, or is this just stuff that they made for the game? 100%. As you're seeing from this list, it's actual music, right? It's stuff that was already made, or I think in this case, because I'm seeing Mr. Bongo a lot, might have been stuff that was made for this. It might be a mix, to be fair. But yeah, Max Payne 3 is something special. It is still, after 10 years, it is still something special, I have to say.